Well, the allegations, of course, they shock the conscience when you're talking about how vivid and emotional and also vicious these sexual acts were against them.
The disturbing allegations against P. Diddy once again taking center stage as accuser Jane Doe slams the rapper with a lengthy counter-argument after Diddy motioned to have her civil suit thrown out. All this just means Jane Doe is fighting back.
But in terms of Jane Doe's attorneys, they set out so much case precedent, like other cases that have been heard with those similar arguments, and they fall in the favor of Jane Doe.
But Jane Doe isn't stopping at Diddy.
Bad boy should be considered part of this lawsuit and also held responsible.
And her testimony could play a large role in the federal investigation against Diddy.
These women are becoming possible witnesses or persons of interest that the feds want to interview to see what insight they can offer to the federal government.
We have to start right away with another Law&Crime legal alert. Have you experienced severe gastroparesis or other side effects after taking Ozempic or another GLP-1 weight loss medication? Ozempic lawsuits now allege the drug can lead to severe intestinal blockage and persistent vomiting, and that manufacturers allegedly failed to provide adequate warning about these risks. True Law, one of our legal sponsors, is helping those injured now file a claim. Visit glp1case.com/LC News to answer less than 10 questions and check your eligibility to file a claim. For now, no criminal charges have been filed against 54-year-old Sean Combs, better known as the rapper P. Diddy, but there have been a slew of damning allegations against him dating back to the early 90s. Now, he faces multiple civil lawsuits from accusers saying he sexually assaulted them, attacked them, and coerced them into illegal activity. And it's these many allegations that have likely made way for the federal investigation against him.
All this information that's being brought to light by these civil litigants doing, I guess, the legwork for the federal government to actually consider and look into a federal prosecution of Diddy and possibly others.
That's former homicide prosecutor and trial attorney Bernarda Villalona. She says specific allegations brought against Diddy in these civil suits probably yielded some major federal activity.
The record executive, the producer, Little Rob, when he filed his lawsuit and when he said that there were videotapes in the sense that recordings were being done inside of Diddy's house, I think that was a strong incentive and strong ammunition for the feds to get a search warrant for Diddy's house.
On March 25th, federal investigators issued search warrants at 2 of Diddy's homes in both Florida and California. Federal investigators haven't revealed what was removed from Diddy's homes, but we can infer what they were looking for: video footage, audio recordings, and pictures of this alleged illegal activity. We first heard rumblings about all this last November when Cassandra Ventura, known publicly as the singer Cassie, filed a civil suit against Diddy. The pair dated for years, and Cassie alleged that during that time Diddy controlled her, physically beat her, raped her, and even forced her to have sex with prostitutes. The lawsuit was settled one day after it was filed, and now we probably know why.
Now, we knew in terms of what happened with Cassie, absolutely had to settle, especially looking back now since we saw that video of that hotel video where he's brutally beating Cassie, that it was absolutely the right move for him to have settled. But the problem that he encountered there is that he should have settled before the lawsuit was filed.
Last month, video of Diddy physically assaulting Cassie was made public. The video is extremely graphic, so we've chosen to just show screenshots rather than the unedited video. In that version, Diddy can be seen chasing Cassie down the hallway in a hotel, attacking her until she falls to the ground. What's notable about this video, beyond just its graphic nature, is that it led to Diddy speaking out again publicly for the first time in months.
I was f***ed up. I hit rock bottom, but I make no excuses. My behavior on that video is inexcusable. I take full responsibility for my actions in that video. I'm disgusted. I was disgusted then when I did it. I'm disgusted now. I went and I sought out professional help. I had to go into therapy, and go into rehab. Had to ask God for his mercy and grace. I'm so sorry. But I'm committed to be a better man each and every day. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm truly sorry.
And Bernarda has some thoughts about this video.
I did see that he released a video where he's apologizing for his acts. This is after the release of the Cassie video. Then I think the best piece of advice for Diddy is just shut up. Do not give any interviews. Do not release any videos. Do not release any apologies. At this point, he needs to remain just mute because we don't know the exposure he has criminally or civilly. So at this point, it's just remain mute and let your lawyers do the work for you.
And since last November, Diddy's lawyers have been hard at work after the slew of civil cases against him. We mentioned Cassie's, that was filed under the New York Survivor Act. Multiple other cases were also filed under that act, including Joy Dickerson-Neal, Liza Gardner, and Jane Doe. Joy Dickerson-Neal alleges Diddy assaulted her in the 90s when she was a college student in New York. She says Diddy even recorded video of the assault and passed it around to other people. Liza Gardner says she was also assaulted by Diddy in the early 90s in New York, and that Diddy later choked her to the point that she lost consciousness. Rodney Jones, also known as the producer Lil Rod, also filed civil suit against Diddy, alleging sexual assault, and also that Diddy is the kingpin in a sex, drug, and gun trafficking empire. Lil Rod also alleged Diddy has hundreds of hours of recording showing this alleged illegal activity. Many, like Bernarda, believe that was the catalyst for the federal raids. Following Lil Rod's civil suit, Diddy was named in 3 more. One civil suit names him and alleges his son, Christian Combs, assaulted a woman on a yacht. Just last month, Diddy faced 2 new lawsuits filed by Crystal McKinney and April Lampros. Both women allege Diddy sexually assaulted them in New York. And then there's Jane Doe. She says Diddy assaulted her when she was just 17 years old in 2003. According to her civil suit, Jane Doe met Diddy's associate, Harvey Pierre, in Michigan. Harvey called Diddy, who urged Jane Doe to accompany him on a flight to New York. Jane Doe says she flew on this private jet and met up with Diddy at his studio. She even included pictures of her and Diddy in the lawsuit. After that, Diddy, Harvey Pierre, and someone listed as a third assailant allegedly raped Jane Doe. Do you believe that Jane Doe came forth with some pretty strong allegations?
Well, the allegations, of course, they shock the conscience when you're talking about how vivid and emotional and also vicious these sexual acts were against her. We're not talking about just one person having a sexual encounter with her. We're talking about 2 other men that joined in this sexual encounter and how they allegedly drugged her and gave her so much alcohol that she could not have consented, which also goes to the argument and actually plays into the defense favor, because if you were so out of it, how do you remember what actually transpired? So that's an issue that the plaintiff, Jane Doe, is going to have to deal with if there is a trial and this case does not settle. However, still, looking at this entire case, I think that we have to see what else is out there that will be able to corroborate Jane Doe. Because right now, what makes her case so strong is that there are other cases of other Jane Does that have come forward. But when it comes to time of trial, it's just going to be Jane Doe's case that's going to be heard by that jury. So we'll just have to wait and see how the discovery process plays out, because it's during the discovery process where you'll get more information as to what other corroborating evidence is out there aside from just the word of Jane Doe. But just looking at the document itself, the amended complaint, so it says that she was flown out in a specific jet. That information about that jet, about who was on that jet, the manifest of that jet, what time that jet flew out, where did it go, who else was on it, and information like that would tend to corroborate her allegations, as well as the photographs that are included in the complaint of her sitting on Diddy's lap.
Jane Doe initially filed this civil suit in 2023, and in May of this year, Diddy's team fired back, filing a motion to dismiss. Just this month, Jane Doe's team replied to that motion and, according to Bernarda, brought on some strong arguments.
In terms of Jane Doe responding to the motion to dismiss, when we're dealing with a motion to dismiss, unless it's on legal grounds, a court is not going to touch it. The defense is trying to go after the credibility, but when you're dealing with facts and you're dealing with issues with facts and issues with credibility, that is for a trial. That takes place at the time of trial. So in terms of what a judge is going to do, the judge is going to deny the motion to dismiss and say that this case can continue on.
So if we think that the judge is going to deny this motion to dismiss, why did Jane Doe's team come forward with this retort, basically, the 20 pages where they countered everything Diddy had brought forward?
Because it's still a matter of strategy. Because number one, you're dealing with a potential jury pool if this case were to go to a jury. So that's number one, dealing with a potential jury pool. Number two, that his response and the firm's response is giving strength to those potential victims that are out there to come forward.
To understand Jane Doe's most recent filing, we have to take a look at Diddy's motion to dismiss filed on May 10th. Diddy's team called Jane Doe's suit calculated to focus attention on its salacious and depraved allegations. The motion went on to call it a stunt, saying it was, quote, intended to prominently showcase a baseless and time-barred claim, which was designed to cause the Combs defendants unwanted publicity, embarrassment, and financial costs, so the plaintiff could extract an undeserved financial recovery from them. But Diddy's team got into the specifics too. The first dig comes at Jane Doe's timeline. Her lawsuit says the alleged assault happened in 2003, but doesn't get more specific. Diddy's motion to dismiss cites this, writing, quote, plaintiff cannot allege what day or time of the year the alleged incident occurred, yet purports to miraculously recall the most pertinent details with specificity. I asked Bernarda about this argument. We've also talked about Diddy's team kind of attacking the credibility that Jane Doe has brought forward. And one of their arguments is that Jane Doe says this happened in 2003, but she doesn't have an exact date, a month, a day, etc. So Diddy says, hey, can we even believe her at all? She doesn't know when this happened. How do you feel about that argument?
Exactly. And it's something that you would expect because you're talking about something that happened so long ago. You encounter that in criminal cases as well, because we're talking about an incident from 2003. So I have several responses as to that. Number one, again, dealing with the credibility of this victim, of this complainant. The judge is not going to address that when having to decide a motion to dismiss. That's number one. Number two, in terms of discrediting her, you still don't answer the question as to why does she have photographs of being inside of your studio if it didn't actually transpire and you don't know this person. Number three, we're not really worried about the actual dates and the specifics because as long as you can give a general time frame, the law will still allow you to move forward with that.
The court docs then get a bit more specific, referencing the VGM or VGM VPL. Either of these acronyms refers to the Victims of Gender-Motivated Protection Law in New York City. It came to pass in 2000 and allows victims of gender-motivated violence to pursue legal action in cases that include things like sexual assault, harassment, or battery. There's usually a 7-year statute of limitations for this type of case. Diddy's motion mentions a timeline, saying Jane Doe's claim is time-barred. His team writes, quote, based on conduct that allegedly occurred in 2003 and applying the VGM's 7-year statute of limitations, plaintiff's claim expired in 2010. Plaintiff erroneously contends that her claim is saved by the VGM's claim revival provision. So Diddy's team says Jane Doe's deadline to file this suit was actually August 14th, 2021. But Jane Doe's team disagrees, writing, quote, in 2022, the New York City Council amended the VGM VPL to revive VGM VPL claims that had already expired for a 2-year period, from March 1st, 2023 to March 1st, 2025. Her team goes even farther, mentioning the Child Victims Act, or CVA. Jane Doe's filing notes the Child Victims Act, CVA, on the other hand, was enacted by the New York State Legislature in 2019, reviving the statute of limitations for civil claims related to sexual offenses committed against minors. With this in mind, Jane Doe's team write, quotes, Defying logic, defendants attempt to contort the CVA, which does not provide for an independent cause of action or grant the ability for a court to award specific relief and damages into a law that somehow preempts the VGM VPL. Jane Doe's team hammers this point over many pages, summing it up with, quote, "All the cases defendants cite concerning retroactivity are simply not relevant here, where the claims are within the terms and statute of limitations set by the current operative version of the VGM VPL." Basically, it boils down to Diddy's team says, hey, you missed the deadline. But Jane Doe's team says, no, we didn't. What do you think?
So in terms of Jane Doe's legal team, they're going to win on this argument because we're dealing with two different laws, but they have been supported with different cases since that law has come out. So they are going to win on those grounds. Now, those grounds in terms of missing the deadline, that is something that the judge will take into account when deciding a motion to dismiss. But in terms of Jane Doe's attorneys, they set out so much case precedent, like other cases that have been heard with those similar arguments, and they fall in the favor of Jane Doe. So that's not going to be an issue for this case to move forward.
Diddy's motion also takes aim at who Jane Doe has listed as a defendant, Bad Boy Records. His filing reads in part, quote, "The FAC, or First Amended Complaint, fails to state a claim against the corporate defendants because the individual defendants' alleged misconduct cannot be imputed to them. Sexual assault and related misbehavior by an employee are outside the scope of employment and cannot be imputed to an employer." Jane Doe's team pushes back in their newest filing, even including the header, quote, "The corporate defendants are liable because they enabled sexual assault." Their response outlines this, writing, quote, "Because the individual defendants used their relationship with the corporate defendants to lure Ms. Doe to the studio, and because the studio and the record label plainly made it possible for the horrific assault of Ms. Doe to occur, the corporate defendants enabled the unlawful conduct and are therefore liable. Sean Combs' corporations, including defendants Bad Boy and Daddy's House, were in the very business of sexual misconduct." If we're taking a closer look at the defendants, what's interesting is that Bad Boy Records is also included. And this is something that Diddy brought up in his motion. He's saying, okay, you can't include Bad Boy Records. They have nothing to do with it. They can't be responsible for what their employee is doing. But then Jane Doe counters and says, hey, you know what? They kind of manifested all of this. They set it all up. It happened in the studio. Who is right in this scenario? Should Bad Boy be listed as a defendant?
So I think in this case, Bad Boy should be listed as a defendant. And again, this is just going by what we see in the papers. But the arguments that are put forth by the plaintiff's attorney, by Jane Doe's attorney, they're saying that Bad Boy enabled this conduct to take place. They provided the location for this to take place. And actually, by using the Bad Boy name and the image and the branding, that's what enticed this Jane Doe to come forth and get on that plane from Michigan to come down to New Jersey, New York, in order to go into that studio. So because it took place on Bad Boy property and they used the name and the branding to get her here, that's why the corporate veil should be pierced, in the sense that Bad Boy should be considered part of this lawsuit and also held responsible because they acted in their business capacity as well as their individual capacity, because Diddy and the co-defendant are Bad Boy.
But it's important to consider the other defendants too. Jane Doe says that Diddy raped her, but also lists two other people, Harvey Pierre, who is apparently the one who got her onto this private jet, and then a third assailant. And what's interesting to me is she lists Diddy's name and Harvey Pierre's, but then just says third assailant. So why would she maybe not identify that person?
It could be that she doesn't know the name or the identity of that third assailant, because there was a footnote, though, by Jane Doe's attorney saying that through the discovery process that they'll at some point, at a later point, be able to name that third assailant, and they'll amend their complaint to include the name of that third assailant. But that is something that's very rare. I rarely see that, where a person is not identified when we're talking about a defendant. Of course, when we're talking about a plaintiff, it is quite normal when we're talking about sexual allegations that their name is not put into the complaint, into the public purview, but the court will know who they're talking about.
Jane Doe's response to Diddy's motion also makes reference to other accusers and what they said happened at the hands of Diddy. Diddy's team mentioned these cases too.
Because even the first page of his response lays out the different cases and filings that have taken place since that initial filing that he filed having to deal with Cassie Ventura. So it's given strength and also awareness to other potential victims that they can come forward, and that now the cases are building against Diddy and his other people that he worked with.
Yeah, you spoke about those other lawsuits that were mentioned in Jane Doe's response recently. There were at least 4, if not 5. There could have been more. Does all of this bolster Jane Doe's argument, her allegations here, and kind of lay out a pattern of abuse?
So it bolsters her credibility in a sense for the public to see. But in terms of if there's a trial that takes place, those other cases are not going to be brought together all in one. They're going to be separate cases. However, what is possible that if Diddy were to testify, that he can be cross-examined about those other cases. So it will play a role in that extent.
If we're talking about the sheer number of lawsuits that are against him, because we have Cassie, obviously that one was settled, but there are several more that have yet to be settled. To me, it sounds like Diddy's team is working overtime. I mean, they have a lot to keep track of with all these different suits. Is it possible, if we're looking at Diddy's team, that they're overwhelmed with the number of allegations that he faces?
Well, in terms of Diddy's team, it all depends. How much money are you willing to put forth in terms of Diddy? How much money are you willing to put forth for these legal fees? Because at this point, you absolutely have to take these civil lawsuits seriously, because you know that these civil lawsuits can have an impact on your criminal case, if there is a criminal case, if there are charges that are filed. Because I think it's these civil lawsuits, the filing of them, is what has red flagged him for the government, for the feds to look into Diddy and conduct an investigation. For example, the record executive, the producer, Little Rob, when he filed his lawsuit and when he said that there were videotapes in the sense that recordings were being done inside of Diddy's house, I think that was a strong incentive and strong ammunition for the feds to get a search warrant for Diddy's house. So it's all this information that's being brought to light by these civil litigants doing, I guess, the legwork for the federal government to actually consider and look into a federal prosecution of Diddy and possibly others.
But what sets Jane Doe's case apart from the others is the photos included in the lawsuit. If we're talking about the photos, those are huge because there are several civil lawsuits that are against Diddy, but this is the only one that I've seen that has these photos. So why would Jane Doe's team include them, kind of to bolster their argument and show she actually was with Diddy?
Absolutely. So that way, by including the photographs inside of that complaint, number one, takes away the argument that Diddy can't say, I don't even know who you're talking about. I've never met this girl before. I've never seen her before. She's never been in my presence. She's never been in my studio. So it takes away that argument when you have that photograph, unless Diddy's camp is going to say that it's been altered, that photograph that was put together. You know, now that we're talking about AI and artificial intelligence, it has become a huge issue. So the question would be, how do you document and backtrack how that photograph came to light?
With their most recent filing, it seems like Jane Doe's team shows no sign of slowing. But could the suit end in a settlement, or will it go to trial? We've talked a lot about where this case is headed, the trial you've mentioned several times, and it looks like Jane Doe is hoping to head that way too. But is it possible that they settle outside of court ahead of time? What do you think the move is there?
Oh, absolutely. You have to think that with these civil cases, the majority of civil cases, civil lawsuits end up settling without going to trial, and they end up settling without an admission of any type of guilt or liability. The problem is that in terms of settling in this case is that Diddy is facing so many other lawsuits that we just don't know how many more lawsuits are going to come about. And also by settling, it's giving, in terms of Diddy, It's giving other people that are suing him and wanting to sue him ammunition to want to sue him because they know that he will settle because he's facing so many lawsuits. And aside from that, a possible criminal prosecution. So at this point, I don't think it will be smart for Diddy to settle until he figures out what else is out there, and also possibly try to get some more discovery out of this to determine what is the strength of the case. Is there video that's out there? Are there more photographs that are out there to determine how strong of a case that these plaintiffs had to make that determination of whether it's something that they should go forward with trial or whether they should actually settle the case.
But amidst all this, there's still the federal investigation and looming charges for Diddy. If we're looking ahead to this potential federal prosecution against Diddy, we've recently heard some rumblings that a grand jury is being convened of accusers or people who say that he had sexually assaulted them. So could Jane Doe be somebody who the feds are speaking with right now?
Absolutely. I think any civil lawsuit that's coming out now having to deal with Diddy, especially of a sexual nature, that it's these women are becoming possible witnesses or persons of interest that the feds want to interview to see what insight they can offer to the federal government as to any type of criminality against Diddy. So I think definitely they're providing ammunition for the federal government, for these prosecutors to look into Diddy and possibly even call them to testify before a grand jury.
And if Diddy is going to be indicted, when might that be?
So when they executed the search warrant, that was the number one question that everyone asked. When will there be an arrest? And what I tell people is that because there were so much electronic items that were recovered from both of the houses, that the government, the federal government, has to now look into those videos, look into whatever tablets they got, look into whatever phones they got, and do a dump of those items to see what are on those recordings, what audios recordings existed, what are on those phones, and conduct a forensic examination of those items. And that takes a long time. That can take months to try to go through all that information. I mean, just think about it. Open up your phone and see how many text messages you have or how many photos you have in your camera. So just imagine having to deal with that with Diddy and for the extensive amount of time. And also work on identifying who are the people on those videos, who are the people that are on those photographs, in those photographs or in those text messages. So it takes time. Also, then aside from that, conduct an investigation of interviewing these known complainants, these plaintiffs that the government now knows because of these civil lawsuits. So it takes time. I think it could be still another few months before we see any movement in terms of whether there will be an arrest in this case.
Just last month, we heard from Diddy himself on social media, but aside from that, we've only gotten a few statements from his legal representation. In regards to the federal raids, Diddy's team released a statement calling it a, quote, gross overuse of military-level force, saying there is no excuse for the excessive show of force and hostility exhibited by authorities or the way his children and employees were treated. In response to Lil Rod's lawsuit, Diddy's team says in part, quote, his reckless name-dropping about events that are pure fiction and simply did not happen is nothing more than a transparent attempt to garner headlines. This is a developing story that will continue to follow and bring you all the latest Diddy developments as they unfold. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.